So welcome everyone to yet another year of celebrating, commemorating Tisha B'Av. It's been exactly 1,950 years since the destruction of Second Beis Hamikdash. Much more than years of United States of America, and it's been a long time. But every year we are instructed to get together, and this year we're getting together here in our synagogue, Heritage Russian Jewish Congregation in Chicago, and beyond the walls of our congregation. Many people in our community are watching us, and there are many questions that I would like to address and to answer today. Again, as I said, it's been 1,950 years since the destruction. And usually our attitude to life is, whatever happened, let's look ahead of us and continue moving. In Yiddish it says verfallen. It's broken, verfallen, broken. Don't worry over the spilled milk and just keep going. But our rabbis instruct us that no, we have to get together every year and commemorate something that happened many years ago. And the question, how does it go together with a general view on life? Another question is that we know for a fact that previous generations that were closer to the destruction, they mourned much more than us, because it was still fresh. And with years, it doesn't feel as fresh, and it's hard to keep the same level of mourning. So how are we supposed, in 2020, here in America, not even in Eretz Yisrael, not even in Israel, how are we supposed to attain the same level of mourning and to feel? We're supposed to cry on this day. How can we cry? How can you feel? How can we feel the same way as our forefathers felt when it was really happened in the same generation? On Tisha B'Av, we know there's a special scroll called Eicha. It's a scroll that documents the destruction of Beis Hamikdash, of the temple, which we will read in a few minutes. We also read the, so to say, kinos. In Hebrew it says kinos, in English like lamentation. It's a book of sad descriptions of what happened. So this is the book of Kinos. I have it here in English and Hebrew. There are books in Russian language as well. And so there are many Kinos, many of them. So I just want to mention and address one of them is 24, Kina 24, which was written many hundreds of years ago by Rabbi Elazar HaKalir, one of the rabbis and poets and Kabbalists. But the first 4 lines, it says, Al Churban Beis Hamikdash ki huras v'ki hudash, espot b'chol shana v'shana mispet chadash, al hakodesh v'al hamikdash, which translates, over the destruction of the temple, which was destroyed and which was stepped over, I will eulogize every year and year a new eulogy. B'chol shana v'shana mispet chadash, a new eulogy. Al hakodesh v'al hamikdash, on the holiness and on the holy temple. That's the first stanza, first 4. And rabbis ask the major question is, what does it mean, mispet chadash? Every Yom Tov, let's say Pesach, right? We have Agoda Shel Pesach, we have Seder Pesach, Seder at the table, and it's the same. We're not adding new things and new events that happened. It was an event that happened at a certain time in history, and we talk over the same event. And here on Tisha B'Av, we are not instructed, but Rabbi Elazar HaKalir mentions a spot, Mispet Chadash. So what does it mean? What do we add? It's the same. Unfortunately, nothing new happened since 1,950 years ago. Anybody who was in Israel can see that the ruins are still there, and Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, and as a result, Jewish people went to exile, Golus, and we're still in Golus. And yes, some good things happened. There's a state of Israel, and many people live in Israel, but the destruction itself stayed the same. So what are we supposed to add and why to this Mispet Chadash, to this, what is this new hesped, new eulogy? So these are big questions, and they can be answered in just in one sentence. But I'll answer them, and my hope, my goal is that it will really practically will help us, even so many years after, to relate in our generations, in this time, today, here in Chicago, to relate to what happened and what we're supposed to do. Tisha B'Av. Today is Tisha B'Av. It's the saddest day in the history, it's the saddest day in Jewish calendar. So, I mentioned Eicha, right, which is a scroll, and there's a commentary on Eicha. It's called Medrash on Eicha. And Medrash mentions the following story. And I read it in Hebrew, I'll translate. And Medrash says, Maisa Beisha Achas Shehaisa Bishchunosa Sheraban Gamliel. There was a situation in the neighborhood of one of the biggest famous rabbis, Rabban Gamliel. There was lived a woman, V'hayala ben Tishchores Umeis, which I think means, and she had a son that got sick and died. She lost her son. V'haisa boicha alav balayla, and every night, you know, night is like time when it feels the most, and every night, when night would fall, she would cry for her son. V'haya Rabban Gamliel shomea es kola. Rabban Gamliel heard, every night he heard her voice, she's a neighbor. V'haya niskar churban beis hamikdash. V'haya boicha ima. He would remember, she would remind him about the destruction of a temple, and he will cry with her. He would cry so much, it's hard even to imagine, that his eyelashes fell off. And it was every single night. So apparently it affected him so much that students felt how it affected the rabbi. And since the students felt it, they had to ask her to leave and just to change the place, because the rabbi wasn't able to continue doing his work and teaching and guiding because he was so affected. And that's the story. That's the story. So the Medrash on Eicha brings the story, so it must be important. Now, this story needs explanation. And the main thing, one question in the story, like, so what is here? A lady lost her son, a lady crying every night. Rabban Gamliel hears her crying, and he starts crying with her about Beis Hamikdash. Now, what does with her mean? If it means just timing, you know, I'm already crying, she's crying, we're crying together with her. I'm crying with her, but we're crying for different things. She's crying for her son, I'm crying for Beis Hamikdash. It's a little bit strange to interpret this way, because what about Rabban Gamliel thinking about her son? He doesn't care that he has a lady next to you crying about her son, and you're, oh, by the way, she's crying, Beis Hamikdash, we should cry, but what about her son? Does he care about? He doesn't care about her son. He cried only because of the Beis Hamikdash, and but it says he's crying with her. So it must mean that he was crying with her about her son. That's a simple, straightforward explanation. Every human being, there's a person next to you who you care about. She lost her son. She's crying. You're crying with her about her son. So what does it mean he's crying about Beis Hamikdash? This requires explanation. Another important point. After Holocaust, which is fresh still, and is a major destruction event in our time, rabbis, people came to rabbis, leaders of generation, and asked them, why don't we appoint a special day as a religious holiday, like we have Tisha B'Av, to commemorate the Holocaust, which was done, not as a religious holiday, right? There's a Yom HaShoah, it's been done. But they were asking to make the same way as we have Pesach, we have Sukkot, we have Tisha B'Av, it's a major event, let's make it make sense, let's make a special day. And it sounds logical, but what rabbis noticed, they looked at this kinos, right, that I mentioned, and if you remember, in those kinos, a lot of them are not about Beis Hamikdash. A lot of them are about events that happened to Jewish community in different times of Jewish history. There were events 12th century where the burning of Talmud in France. There were events in Middle Ages in France, also in Germany, where whole communities were burned because they refused to accept Christianity. There are many events. Asara Harugi Malchus, we know the 10 greatest leaders were murdered in different times in history, some of them much after Beis Hamikdash destruction of the temple. And nevertheless, we all mention all these events that happened in different Jewish communities in different times of Jewish history. They're all put together here in these kinos. So you see that historically, we did not select separate days for separate events, and we somehow put them all here. So one thing we can understand, okay, we do not maybe want to add another days. You know, there's so many days in Jewish history, we want to have fun, and to add more days of sad days, and let's just pile everything. No, first of all, we do not want to add more days. It's one part of the solution, but second part is not just that we don't want to add another day, but we don't want to forget. So let's put them on Tisha B'Av. And the question is, why should we put them together with Tisha B'Av? Is it again because we're already crying, we opened already a box of Kleenex, right? Let's already cry for everything together. Or there's more to that. Another thing is, we know in Jewish law this concept, en me'arbem simcha b'simcha. If somebody makes a wedding, we don't make wedding on Shabbos, we don't make wedding on Yom Tov. Why? Not because it's hard to make, even we could make it, but look, there's a holiday, there's a Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuos, there's a holiday, and I want to celebrate, I want to concentrate on one topic, and I want to concentrate on the marriage of my child. We don't mix together. So I would say, by the same logic, why should we me'ara, why should we mix tzara with tzara, right? Why should we? Because inevitably it will minimize one of them, right? If we cry of all of them, so we sort of don't cry for none of them. So how come here we do this thing? Rabbis say, you know what? We're not making separate commemoration. We put all of them together on Tisha B'Av. Why would we put non-related things in a one day together with destruction of Beis Hamikdash? Unless they are related. Then it's not separate events, and it's not that we mourning on separate things. And that's what rabbis tell us. That's what rabbis teach us. Amazing thing. They say if we would understand what temple meant for Jewish people, for everybody in the world, that when temple was standing, there was a first temple standing 410 years. 70 years later, we rebuilt the temple, it stood 420 years. It's a long period of time. In those periods of time, Jewish people were the most respected people in the world, most looked up to, richest, healthiest, longevity. Nobody miscarried. Torah says, I promise you, if you follow my ways, right, nothing will happen to you. We had those periods of time, if you remember from the Torah, when miraglim, when messages came with fruits, right? And you read description of those fruits, of those pomegranate and grapes, like two people couldn't carry. We feel it's like in the fairy tales, right? But Torah says it was literal. The fruit was such a size. Talmud talks about the sizes of fruit in those times. In the time of Beis Hamikdash, nature was different. Everything was different. And the blessing that God gave to Jewish people, it was fulfilled in those times. And once Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, everything went down. Everything, not just the size of the fruit. We went down, we became a target for all these persecutions and topic of jokes, and we went into exile, and horrible, horrible things happened. The whole sort of axle of the earth shifted, and the nature and the climate changed. Literally everything changed. So rabbis say, since then, everything, all the horrible things that befall Jewish people, they are a result of that destruction. Destruction wasn't just one-time thing, and now we're like looking back in the history and mourning. The destruction continues. Everything that happened, all those burning of a Talmud of 12th century, and burning Jewish community, locking them in the castles, in the synagogues, and burning down whole communities. All of these are not separate events, not accidental events. They're connected, and they're straight result of destruction of the temple. And therefore, they're not separate events. And therefore, when we put all of them in Tisha B'Av, it's not random. We're saying by this that we understand that all these things, they're connected, they're part of the destruction. And not just communal destructions. Like Rabban Gamliel, now we can understand better that Medrash, when Rabban Gamliel, let's hear it again. There was a woman in the neighborhood of Rabban Gamliel who lost her child, and she was crying every night. And when Rabban Gamliel heard her crying, he also started crying with her about destruction of Beis Hamikdash. So what was he crying about? He was crying with her about her son, but understanding that even that loss is a result of destruction of Beis Hamikdash. So we see not just communal event, not just Holocaust, but every personal event. That's what rabbis say. Every event that happens with us, every misfortune is a direct result of us being in this situation, like now in exile, with the destruction of Beis Hamikdash. And therefore, we're not mourning about something that happened many years ago. We're mourning about continuous destruction that happens, unfortunately, every single year. And that's why when it says, B'chol shana v'shana mispet chadash, unfortunately, every year we mourn a new loss. We mourn about Beis Hamikdash, a new loss every single year, because it's hard to find family that didn't have a loss. And there are different types of losses. And especially this year, I think if we are looking for a reason, compared to last year, other years, we even have more reasons to mourn, because more people had losses this year about the virus that's going on. People lost parents. I know families that lost both parents on the same day due to coronavirus. I know people who lost members of the family who just couldn't handle it anymore psychologically, and families lost these people. People lost many things. People lost jobs, people got sick. What about lost relationships? Everything, again, miscarriages happened. It happens every day, unfortunately, in our community. And we just look at this as like It happens, it's a random event. But Rabbi said, no, you have to understand, you have to tie this together. It wasn't like this. Jewish people were not like this before. And we don't see it. It was so long ago. But it wasn't like this. And now everything has happened. It's part of the destruction. And therefore it's Mispet Chadash. It's a new eulogy every year. It's about us. It's about us. So if we want to connect properly to this day, I think the right way, it's not easy, it's not happy, but we can look everything what happened to us this year or to people we know and cry about those things, understanding that this is part of crying for the lost temple. And even more, even if you say, okay, it happened, maybe somebody, I didn't lose anything, I didn't lose job, I didn't lose anybody around me, right? I'm in this field of business that, stocks went up. And, but there's another thing. What about our personal, not just physical, How many people in our larger community spiritually disconnected and goes down with every generation, disconnected from our roots? This is another loss. And in the Kinas, Espot bechol shana mispet chadash ala kodesh v'ala mikdash. Mikdash is Beis HaMikdash. What is ala kodesh? Ala kodesh is on a spiritual loss. I'm crying about loss of Beis HaMikdash, but I'm also crying about my spiritual loss, or the people around me as a community. How many people? It's sad to say, but how many people, unfortunately, in a larger community can say that I know my Jewish history, I know how to read and write Hebrew? Every nation knows their language, right? How many Jews, especially Jews from former Soviet Union, our community, how many of them know anything about Jewish leaders, names, famous men, famous women? We don't know. And we don't feel that we don't know. We don't feel the loss. That's the problem. But it's also a loss. It's a loss. It's a eulogy. We should cry over ourselves, how much we're disconnected, to the point we don't even feel. We live in a country and we know every movie that comes out, and every show and every singer, right? What about our own people, our own culture? We don't know. This is also a reason to cry on this day. And unfortunately, this cry is every year a new cry, because more and more, and how much seeps into our community from an outside community, the foreign culture, right? It seeps into our community, it breaks our relationships, how many divorces are in our families, right? It's also part of the Tisha B'Av, how many disconnect and misunderstandings between parents and children. And even in our community, it's not, it's not as tragic, but for me it's tragic that because of all this virus that's going around, we can't get together normally as a community. We had so many, Baruch Hashem, births in community, right, and weddings, right? We couldn't even celebrate them. It's a loss. We can think about this and cry on this day, because all of this connected to destruction of Beis HaMikdash. So it's not about them, and it's not about what happened many years ago. It's about us here and now, about our losses that are part of this big loss. And that's the way I feel that we can properly understand how big loss we experience. But it's a sad day, and it's appropriate to be sad and to cry, but I don't want to leave everybody only with on a sad note. I just want to say that our sources say that Mashiach will be born in Tisha B'Av. Out of all days of the year, Mashiach will be born in Tisha B'Av. So what does it mean? What it means is that out of all this sorrow, all this cry, the hope grows. The hope comes from why? I think because if we understand the reason and the source of a destruction, if we know the real source, there's a hope that we can fix it. That we can fix it. And if we start working not on them, right? We will start working and saying, make Israel, nation of Israel, great again. To restore ourselves to the previous level. Not again, not running and changing the world, but changing from inside out, to connecting more. To connect it more to our sources. To increase our knowledge. What is Judaism all about? To make better our relationships in families, to watch how we talk, what we say to each other, how we speak to our wives and husbands, to our children, how we scream, and to try to improve this. So this is the way to pave this road opposite of what happened, and slowly, brick by brick, to restore the Beis Hamikdash, to restore the old glory, to become again the light to the nations. That's who we became. And with this, let's hope that the statement in the Talmud says, Kol hamisabel al Yerushalayim zoiche veroa besimchoso. Anybody who mourns about destruction of the temple, about destruction of Jerusalem, we're promised he will merit to see and rejoice of its rebuild. And may it happen in our days. Thank you.